Do you rejoice when you see an evil leader fail? Well, if you're not connected with the person, let's say that's the national leader, some people do rejoice. It's because we don't want an evil leader ruling in our country. But would you rejoice if you could be seen as the cause of the downfall and as well as the successor of his position? You would be accused, of course, of doing something against that leader. And you don't want to have that kind of a record. David was trying to avoid that. So in our story for today, we will see that David learned about the news of the death of King Šaʻul. So today we will be talking about David defends, mourns, and honors King Šaʻul. So we will be shifting now to 2 Samuel. Remember, Samuel was originally one book, but when the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek, which we call the Septuagint, sometime in the 3rd century BC, the translators divided the two books into two. Not only that, that also includes the book of the Kings, 1st and 2nd Kings, and of course Chronicles, because it was quite long. So the cut of that book was from the time that David began to reign. So this is the cut we will be starting with. Okay? So 2 Samuel covers the reign of David from the moment he took power until his last days. And then the book of Kings starts with the ascension of King Shlomo or Solomon to the throne of Israel. Right? Now, we have to understand how the author tells the story and what his intentions were. The main point, I believe, of this chapter, 2 Samuel, chapter 1, David was a righteous man. He carried out justice for Saul against his self-confessed murderer. Well, actually, we'll find out later that the person lied. He really didn't kill Saul. But of course, that's the information David got from the man, and so he executed justice in behalf of Saul. He honored Saul and his sons for their death with a national lament and a memorial song. So people will appreciate and remember Saul in a positive way. David never dethroned Saul. David never hated Saul, that he would kill him, even though he had a couple of opportunities of doing that. David highly respected Saul for his position and authority. He recognized the anointing of God with him. He never had a hand on the death of Saul and his sons. And obviously everybody knew that he was not part of the war where Saul was killed. David never conspired against him. He never asked somebody to kill Saul. But David honored Saul with a memorial song after his death. So that will be the second point. When we get there, we'll learn more about the song. So the people of Benjamin have no reason to be angry with David. It's because even from the time of the judges, there have been tribal rifts among them, especially that Benjamin was almost exterminated when it went alone and it fought against all the 11 tribes of Israel. To the point that they had to help out, bring their men to cooperate with the women so that Benjamin would survive. And one of the key people that came from Benjamin was Saul. Okay. So David was a model of how to deal with an evil predecessor. We will see in the kings of Israel and of Yehuda that this was a problem, how they dealt with the previous ruler. So David was showing how to deal with an evil predecessor. Now, let's review first on how this came about, the setup. If you would remember when we were in 1 Samuel, chapter 29, verse 1, and we're not reading, studying chapter 31, but we will later read it. The Philistines set up their camp in Aphek. So you will find the camp of the Philistines there on the left side in Aphek. This is just above Philistia. And the capital of Saul was in Gibeah. So they had to fight in the north, somewhere almost near the Sea of Galilee. Now, why is the battleground in Yezreel Valley? It's because it has been the traditional battleground for several centuries, not only among the residents of Canaan, but also even by the Egyptians and the Assyrians. They would meet in between, and it would happen to be the plains or the valley of Yezreel. Now, we will find out that Saul and his sons were killed when they ran away, when they were being defeated. They ran away to Mount Gilboa, which is just southeast from Yezreel. So that will be the death site of the royal family. So a close-up look, how big is Yezreel Valley, or Jezreel is what we would see in English. So that is a plain. I got it from Google Maps, a little bit of 3D. So you see it It's a kind of a large land where you can set thousands of men fighting it up there. Let's look closer from another angle, Google Maps. So if you see the red location marker on the north, that would be probably where they fought the battle. And going southeast is where Shaul and his sons ran to escape, but the Philistines were able to catch them there, and that's where they died. Let's look at some pictures which I got from the internet on how Yezreel Valley looked like. You see there, it's a nice plain. It's a place where many battles were fought by different nations throughout the centuries. So you can see several mountains there. So Mount Gilboa is there. Whoever took this picture, the skies were not that clear, and so we could not clearly see Gilboa. But let me show you another picture of Gilboa. So this is the Mount of Gilboa. So you know the Jews or the Israelis were highland people, while the Philistines were lowlands, and they would meet somewhere there. So if you are used to the highlands, you're used to climbing up, that would be an advantage for you. But in this case, the Philistines were able to catch up with the royal family, and they were able to kill, but actually through the arrows. We'll read that in just a while. So Mount Gilboa, place where Shaul and his sons ran away from the Philistines and got killed, in 1 Samuel 31 verse 1. I only have 2 points to share today. So first, David judged the killer of Shaul. 2 Samuel chapter 1 verses 1 to 16. Though the Amaleqis, who brought the report about the death of Shaul and his sons, lied to David and bragged about killing the king of Israel, the future king condemned and executed him to give Shaul justice. It was just right. So remember in our last study in 1 Samuel chapter 30, again we didn't study chapter 31, but we'll read it in just a while. David and his men rescued their families and recovered their possessions from the raiding Amaleqis. So they just came from war. And it was the biggest war that David has ever won, or at least the most amazing. He even shared the loot that he got from winning the war to other Yᵉhuda towns for them to rejoice with him as he was able to do almost the impossible. So at this time, David was very hyped. He was very grateful that he was able to rescue everybody. He was a big hero to them. Everyone was happy with the amazing victory of David. That's why they said, this is David's loot. This belongs to him. But David said, no, everybody gets a share of this. It's just not mine. Everybody gets a portion. Then the bad news came. So let's look at verse 1. After the death of Shaul, David returned from striking down the Amaleqis and stayed in Ziklag 2 days. So that, remember, Ziklag was the place the Philistines gave to David. On the third day, a man arrived from Shaul's camp with his clothes torn and dust on his head. When he came to David, he fell to the ground to pay him honor. Well, you can expect someone to just give him that kind of honor. So, in verse 1, while David was fighting with the Amaleqis in chapter 30, Shaul was fighting against the Philistines. And you remember the story that we studied a few weeks ago. Other Philistine commanders were worried that David would be coming with them in battle with the Israelis. And so what happened? King Achish said, the other Philistine commanders doesn't want you to join us. You go home early in the morning. So David was spared from fighting a war against his fellow Israelis. So that was very encouraging for them. But then when they got home, they saw that their town was ransacked and their families were gone. So the future king did not know that the Israelis lost in this battle. Okay, that he almost joined. Unlike in chapter 23, verse 28, remember, David was on the run, and King Shaul with his 3,000 men were on the other one side of the mountain, and David and his 400 or 600 men were on the other side of the mountain. They were almost caught until Shaul heard the news that the Philistines were attacking them. So King Shaul had to pull back and take care of business there for the moment. And David was so relieved that they get to live another day, right? That was what happened. But the war resumed, and at this time, the Israelis lost. The man went to David knowing that he was the heir to the throne of Shaul. So who would be ruling Israel? No other than David. So that's why he ran to David. He presented himself to David, mourning and also paying respect to the future king. Or at the time, he didn't know he was already the king. He did the right thing to approach David with respect. So David won and gave gifts to Yᵉhuda. That was in the last story. But the sad thing is, they lost their king. Shaul lost his life, and Benjamin lost in this, right? So the conversation happened this way. Where have you come from? David asked him. He answered, I have escaped from the camp of Israel. What happened? David asked, tell me. The men fled from the battle. He replied, many of them fell and died. And Shaul and his son Yᵉhonathan are dead. So imagine the surprise of David at the report. Now, let's go back first in verse 3. I believe that God probably saved this man so that he can report what actually happened in the war. He allowed him to escape so that he can inform David of what happened in the war between the Israelis and the Philistines in 1 Samuel chapter 31. Okay, again, we will look at that chapter in just a while. So, worried why the man was wearing torn clothes and with dust on his head, which is the typical way of showing that he's mourning, okay, David received the most devastating news he could ever hear. That the king was dead, including his sons and his best friend, Yᵉhonathan. After defeating the Amaleqis, his celebration and his happy heart turned to shock and to sorrow. Because it's just a up-down moment in the life of David. One time, he's in high mood because he's winning, and then he had to face a battle, and then he would be winning, and right now, again, something wrong, something bad, the news that he received. So, how did David feel about learning the death of King Šaʻul? Was he happy? Now I can get to be the king. The reason why I'm mentioning that, because David said three possible things. God can take Šaʻul away from the throne, or Šaʻul will finish his term until his old age, or Šaʻul will be killed in battle. He mentioned those three things. And so it happened that the last possible scenario was the one that really happened in this story, that Šaʻul was killed from battle. So was he happy or sad? Now I get to be the king. Now my persecutor is gone. Now God has given me justice against my oppressor. Was he surprised or otherwise? I think he was surprised because he didn't expect that Šaʻul would be dead just a few days from the last time he saw him from the camp by the countryside. Right? How did David accept the news of the death of his best friend, his brother-in-law, Yᵉhonathan? Was he surprised too? I think he was. Was he devastated? I think he was. And maybe he was very angry because he could have helped save his friend. Diba? Remember, Yᵉhonathan saved him when Šaul wanted to kill him when he didn't appear at the banquet. So the news broke David's heart. We don't have a king here in the Philippines. But in other nations like Queen of UK, Queen Elizabeth, everybody was mourning. It was a national news. And most leaders from all over the country went to the funeral and paid their respect to the Queen. Right? So when our former president died, so many people mourned for the death of President Aquino. So let's continue with the story. Verse 5. Then David said to the young man who brought him the report, how do you know that Šaʻul and his son Yᵉhonathan are dead? I happen to be on Mount Gilboa. Happened to be. The young man said, and there was Šaʻul leaning on his spear, with the chariots and their drivers in hot pursuit. When he turned around and saw me, he called out to me, and I said, what can I do? So he happened to have an encounter with Šaʻul. So imagine how David was receiving this news. The man was focusing on how he came into the scenario. David was really in disbelief at this time. I'm imagining how he's trying to make sense of everything. How did he die? When you see from your friend, he put a candle in his profile, you would wonder who died and how the person died. You see, David wanted to be sure that the news was accurate and true. That this man wasn't kidding at all. That this man wasn't spreading fake news or tricking him to show up to Gibeah and be set up and be killed by Šaʻul. Is it really true that the king is dead? Especially my brother-in-law, my best friend. Because that hurts more. And the man said that he was incidentally there. He didn't say, I was part of the war on either camps, or I was there doing some gardening, some farming, and I saw this war, and I happened to see King Šaʻul. He didn't really elaborate on that matter. He asked me, who are you? An Amaleki, I answered. Then he said to me, stand here by me and kill me. I'm in the throes of death, but I'm still alive. So he was telling what Šaʻul was telling him. So I stood beside him and killed him, because I knew that after he had fallen, he could not survive. And I took the crown that was on his head and the band on his arm and have brought them here to my Lord. So imagine even more surprised David was. Well, I'm facing the one who's bringing the news and the one who claimed to be the killer of Shaul. He even told the story of how Yᵉhonathan died. So perhaps David observed, I'm talking about verse 8, that the man was not an Israeli. So the man did admit he's an Amaleqis. So remember, the Amaleqis were the ones who raided Ziklag. So, but what was this Amaleki doing in Mount Gilboa, which was very far? So I think it's probably that this man was a slave of an Israeli, so that's why he was there. Anyway, so at the same time, David wondered why Shaul would ask for the help of that man to kill him. So it's like, he's saying, well, I'm not at fault. King Shaul was the one who wanted to be killed because he was badly injured. Maybe he wanted to end his sorrow. Well, that's a very convenient excuse. So that's why David asked more, who he really was. I'm an Amaleki. He already mentioned that in the last slide that we have seen a while ago. So yes, he's an Amaleki. So trying to impress David, hoping to make himself a hero by killing Shaul, because everybody knew that Shaul wanted to kill David, and paving the way for David to take the throne from Shaul. He told a lie about his soul on the death of the king. How was I able to say that it was a lie? Because 1 Samuel chapter 31 would tell us the real story. But at that time, of course, David didn't know what really happened. So he had to explain why he had the crown of Shaul and the armband and why he brought them to David. So he's like, I'm the kingmaker now. I escaped the battle. I get to witness how Shaul died and bring the symbols of the king to David. He was expecting David to feel good about the news that he was telling him. But he didn't realize it was exactly the opposite. The Amaleki thought that he would impress David by killing Shaul and delivering the crown to the incoming king. Now, let's look at how exactly Shaul died.
Chapter 31. Now the Philistines were fighting against Israel, and the men of Israel fled before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines overtook Saul and his sons, and the Philistines struck down Yᵉhonathan and Abinadab and Malchishua, the sons of Saul. The battle pressed hard against Saul, and the archers found him, and he was badly wounded by the archers. Then Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and mistreat me." But his armor-bearer would not, for he feared greatly. Therefore Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. And when his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell upon his sword and died with him. Thus Saul died, and his 3 sons, and his armor-bearer, and all his men on the same day together. And when the men of Israel who were on the other side of the valley and those beyond the Jordan saw that the men of Israel had fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their cities and fled, and the Philistines came and lived in them. The next day, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. So they cut off his head and stripped off his armor, and sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to carry the good news to the house of their idols and to the people. They put his armor in the temple of Ashtaroth, and they fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan. But when the inhabitants of Jabesh-Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and went all night, and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Bethshan. And they came to Jabesh and burned them there. And they took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree in Jabesh, and fasted 7 days.
So that was the real story on how Shaul and his sons died. Now, the Amaleki may have been there, but he really didn't kill Shaul and his sons. They committed suicide. Again, perhaps he wanted to look like a hero by saying that he killed Shaul. And maybe he actually found the crown and the armband of Shaul even before the Philistines was able to find Shaul. There could be no question on the succession on the throne of the kingdom of Israel. all the sons of Shaul were killed with the king. The people knew that Samuel anointed David as the next king. So in this case, David has no rival. Everybody knew he had to be the next king. Right? That must be very clear. Verse 11, then David and all the men with him took hold of their clothes and tore them. They mourned and wept and fasted till evening for Shaul and his son Yᵉhonathan, and for the army of the Lord, and for the nation of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. So perhaps the Amaleqi was surprised why David wasn't happy at all. Alright? Neither David nor his men was pleased at the report of the Amaleqi. They did not feel excited for the ascension of their commander to the throne of the king of Israel. They were truly hurt at the news of the tragic death of king and the sons. So even the men learned to have the heart of David for the king, for his sons, and for their nation by mourning for them. This is the time to mourn, not to rejoice. Right? So the tragic death of Shaul and his sons at the hands of the Philistines and their loss in the war, of course, against the Philistines, were quite heartbreaking for the men. They could have helped if only Shaul would have accepted them back into society and allowed them to join the battle. So the death of their monarch at the hands of their enemies was quite shameful. It was the worst that could ever happen to their nation. It was a shameful death at the hands of the Philistines, and they actually made a mockery of the bodies of their king and his sons. So this was a very serious mourning and lament for them. Now, of course, we have to take a step back because it says there that they mourned the whole evening and they fasted. So what did they do with the reporter, with the Amaleqi? David said to the young man who brought him the report, "Where are you from?" So he's asking again the question. "I'm the son of a foreigner, an Amaleqi," he answered. So David was sure that actually maybe from the looks, from the accent, from the language, he knew that this was actually not an Israeli. So it wasn't an Israeli who killed the king, but a foreigner, or at least a migrant, or someone who is under their rule. David asked him, "Why weren't you afraid to lift your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed?" David was afraid to lift a hand against King Shaul, but this guy wasn't afraid after all. Now, go back to verse 13. David had to confirm where the man came from. He had to be sure, because it really upset him that this man actually killed Shaul. And how can he execute justice on behalf of Shaul? It would be heartbreaking for him if he had to kill a fellow Israeli. But of course, he had to execute justice for him. It was unbelievable for David to hear anybody trying to kill the king. He even would not let his men kill the king. The man may have been fighting for the Israeli army, that's why he was there. Or maybe his father became a slave of the Israelis during one of the battles that they had with the Amaleqis. That's why he was there. Remember, the Amaleqis were their enemies. And that explains why the man was there. And he had the guts to kill the king because he's not an Israeli after all. He considered the Israelis their enemies. And being able to kill the most important person, the highest authority in the land, was an honor for an Amaleki. But it was a shame for the Israelis. So David asked a rhetorical question. He already knew that he had to condemn this man. He confessed killing Shaul. This question was posed at him in front of everybody, actually condemned the confessor and judgment of David, the new king and the authority in the kingdom. Of course, the answer was obvious because he was an Amaleki. He had no fear of the king of Israel or of our God, the one who anointed King Shaul. He was an Amaleki. Twice David showed fear of killing Shaul, but this man wasn't fearful at all. Perhaps the Amaleki never knew that David avoided killing Shaul twice. He wasn't aware of that. Then David called one of his men and said, "Go strike him down." So imagine how angry David was. So he struck him down and he died. For David had said to him, "Your blood be on your own head. Your own mouth testified against you when you said, 'I killed the Lord's anointed.'" He was so angry at this man. Now, it could have been enough if the Amaleki just gave him the bad news. But he was a self-confessed murderer. Expecting for David to be grateful to him, talking about the Amaleki guy, and hail him as hero. You're the kingmaker. The Amaleqis rather confessed killing the king. And so what he got from David, condemnation to death for being responsible for the death of Shaul. David, as the incoming king, had the authority to execute justice against lawbreakers. You don't kill the king. So the Amaleki implicated himself for the death of King Shaul, even though he lied, as we learned from 1 Samuel chapter 31. David had no idea about it. He didn't realize that this would displease David and would bring him condemnation. So it was just right for David to execute the murder of King Shaul for the sake of justice. Letter B, David memorialized Shaul's death. So this is verses 17 to 27. Rather than rejoicing at the death of his persecutor and finally having the opportunity to rule and reign as the new king, David put all the attention on his former father-in-law and predecessor and honored him with a song of lament for all to sing. It was just proper to mourn for the death of the king. Verse 17, David took up this lament concerning Shaul and his son Yᵉhonathan, and he ordered that the people of Yᵉhuda be taught this lament of the bow. It is written in the book of Yashar. Okay? So we know that David was a music minister. He used to minister to King Shaul by playing the lyre and driving away the evil spirit. So we know also from the book of Psalms, he has composed many songs. And then he would send the lyrics to a musician. So the words of lament came out from David and turned them into a song in honor of Shaul and his best friend Yᵉhonathan, whom others thought was the rightful successor to the throne of his father. But eventually when they saw that David was winning wars, they knew David was the right person to rule them. David commanded his fellow Yehudis to honor the king from Benjamin. So remember, Shaul was from Benjamin. David wanted to show that his fellow people from Yᵉhuda, that the kingship of Israel is not a tribal war. It's not between Benjamin and Yᵉhuda. It's between Israel and the nations. So David showed his tribe, Yᵉhuda, respected the king from Benjamin. So this is the song. A gazelle lies slain on your heights, Israel. How the mighty have fallen. So I think the tune of this is like loud and at the same time weeping. Tell it not in Gath. Proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon. Lest the daughters of the Philistines be glad. Lest the daughters of the uncircumcised rejoice. So we see here David complimented Shaul by comparing him to a gazelle of Mount Gilboa. Now, gazelles are everywhere in the land, but they are very good in running away and also in climbing mountains. So that is why he is compared to a gazelle. The gazelles are swift and hard to chase. So it's a compliment. Now, how the mighty have fallen is actually mentioned in the song 3 times. So this is the first one at the beginning, and the last 2 are at the end of the songs. So I would say this is the title of the song, even though it was said in the previous verse, the song of the bow. But I think, the way we title a song, which is the major part of the song, how the mighty have fallen. So the song started with it and ended with it. The Philistines already knew of the news, but David did not want to hear the Philistines rejoicing. That's why he said, don't tell it to Gath. Even though the news already arrived in the cities of Philistines. There are 5 of them. Okay? Let's go back to 1 Samuel chapter 31 verse 9. What did the Philistines do? They cut off his head and stripped off his armor, and they sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to proclaim the news in the temple of their idols and among their people. They put his armor in the temple of the Ashtoreths and fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan. It's actually a warning to Israel that this is what will happen to you if you fight us back. Shame on your king, shame on his sons, shame on all of you. So, David said, tell it not to Gath or in the streets of Ashkelon. That means I don't want them rejoicing over the death of our king. Right? This is a shameful death. David did not want Shaul to be shamed further among the people of his killers. Mountains of Gilboa, may you have neither dew nor rain. May no shower fall on your terraced fields. For there the shields of the mighty was despised, the shield of Shaul, no longer rubbed with oil. From the blood of the slain, from the flesh of the mighty, the bow of Yᵉhonathan did not turn back. The sword of Shaul did not return unsatisfied. So David was picturing for us how they died, even though he wasn't there. He was an artist. When you're a song composer, you compose in the way that how it could have happened. So David kept calling Shaul the mighty. He's complimenting it. He wanted the people to remember Shaul as a mighty person, not a shameful, evil king. They had a mighty king. The kingdom should be proud of their deceased king. Shaul and Yᵉhonathan were courageous men, even though they actually ran away to Gilboa to escape the Philistines when they were losing the battle. So David wanted the death place of Shaul and his sons to be cursed. Now, I think this is symbolic. He didn't really mean that he wanted the mountain to die, but let the mountain mourn with the death of Shaul and his sons, because that's where they were killed. Maybe they put a marker there. The story doesn't tell us. Verse 23. So Shaul and Yᵉhonathan, in life they were loved and admired. In death they were not parted. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. Daughters of Israel, weep for Shaul, who clothed you in scarlet and finery. Yes, an accomplishment for the nation. Who adorned your garments with ornaments of gold. See, he complimented him for his accomplishments. So David praised both the father and the son, even though the two had arguments because of him. Jonathan was loyal to him, not to his father. But they led the kingdom together. This king, overall in charge, but Jonathan was probably the vizier. That means the prime minister, the one who actually was running things on a day-to-day basis, as the presumed successor. Yᵉhonathan played a crucial role in the rule of his father. He complimented both of them by comparing them to mighty animals like eagles, which was the king of the air, and lions, king of the wilderness. So you don't undermine them, you don't shame them. These are mighty men, though they have fallen. David commanded the women to lead the mourning and lamenting for the death of their king. Now, why women? Because women express their mourning better than men. They can cry out loud. You know, even there are professional mourners. You pay certain women, they would show up in the wake service and they would cry, even though they're not really related. They're paid to cry. David was all praise for Shaul and Yᵉhonathan. He wanted the whole nation to lament for them. Never forget these great men. Honor them. You know how we memorialize our heroes? We name certain streets in their honor. Verse 25, how the mighty have fallen in battle. Yᵉhonathan lies slain on your heights. I grieve for you, Yᵉhonathan, my brother. So he becomes personal here. You were very dear to me. Your love for me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women. How the mighty have fallen. The weapons of war have perished. So this part of the song, the ending part, became more personal to David. David exalts his brother-in-law and best friend, Yᵉhonathan. Now, it could not be said that they were rivals, because even Yᵉhonathan acknowledged David was the incoming king, not him. And he was willing to help him out. Even though Shaul was grooming Yᵉhonathan to succeed him as king, the son recognized that David was the rightful person to the throne of his father. Let me just read again what Yᵉhonathan said when David escaped and he found him where he was hiding. 1 Samuel chapter 23, verse 16, and Shaul's son Yᵉhonathan went to David at Horesh and helped him find strength in God. Don't be afraid, he said. My father Shaul will not lay a hand on you. You will be king over Israel, and I will be second to you. Even my father Shaul knows this. The two of them made a covenant before the Lord. Then Yᵉhonathan went home, and David remained at Horesh. There was never a time that Yᵉhonathan tried to promote himself, and even when David was running away, that he would be the next king. He went to David, and that was a gesture to everybody, that he cared for David. David made sure that the people see how Yᵉhonathan truly cared for his brother-in-law David. So David highly esteemed his best friend Yᵉhonathan, whom Shaul wanted to inherit his throne. So David defends and mourns and honors King Šaʻul. We only had a couple of points today. David judged the killer of Šaʻul, the Amaleqis guy, and David memorialized Shaul's death. Since this, we're just trying to know how the story went. How can we sort of apply this story or the lessons from this story in our day-to-day living? Now, Of course, we don't have the same setup or context or background with what happened in the story. It is understandable if you feel relieved that your persecutor has ceased. But do not rejoice. That's the application. Don't rejoice. Or laugh at his death, at how God may have judged him, if in case the death is God's judgment. That's what happened here in our story. But David didn't rejoice at the death of Shaul. Number 2, mourn at the death of the king for God's sake and for the kingdom. Now, it's like this. David said he's God's anointed. I personally believe not all rulers were anointed by God. Some rulers of the nations appointed themselves there and God allowed them. Okay, you're the ruler there. Now you better do things right. Even though you took the power not the right way. And if you fail, then God will judge you. I'm not saying that every leader is anointed by the Lord. I don't believe in it after all. The kings of Israel were anointed by the Lord. Some of the kings of the northern Israel were not anointed by the Lord. Do not retaliate against your former leader. If you don't like him or he has been a bad leader, you do not have to smear his integrity. Don't add anything to it if you know that he's been exposed and one year could be one of his victims. Or judge him after he ends his term or when he has fallen from grace. Do not speak bad against a deceased when you're giving a eulogy. You know what a eulogy is. During a wake service, you talk about the dead person and talk about the good things. You don't have to talk about the bad things.